Here's the thing about betrayal. Sometimes it doesn't announce itself with screaming or tears. Sometimes it just smiles at you from the aircraft door, hands you a glass of champagne, and wishes you a pleasant flight. Jordan Mercer learned this at 37,000 feet, standing in the first-class cabin with his mistress on his arm and his wife in uniform, greeting passengers like she'd been expecting him all along. But let's back up. Jordan had one of those faces people trusted without knowing why. Square jaw, easy smile, eyes that crinkled just right when he laughed. He'd built a consulting firm that cleared 7 figures annually, drove a Tesla the color of winter clouds, and wore suits that whispered money without shouting it. Everything about him said reliable, solid, the kind of man who showed up when he said he would. His wife, Priya, believed that version of him. Hell, she'd married it. Priya was the kind of beautiful that snuck up on you, not the type that walked into a room and demanded attention, but the kind that settled into your chest quietly and stayed there. She'd been a domestic flight attendant for 6 years, the woman who remembered your drink order mid-flight and made crying babies stop fussing just by existing near them. She woke before the sun most days, pressed her own uniforms, and still managed to have dinner waiting when Jordan came home late, which was often. She didn't complain. That was the thing about Priya. She noticed everything but said very little. Jordan had mistaken her silence for obliviousness. Fatal error. That Tuesday morning started like any other. Priya stood in their kitchen, zipping her flight bag, while Jordan scrolled through his phone, tie already perfect, mind already gone. Leaving early again? He didn't look up. Client meetings. You've been having a lot of those. That's what they pay me for, babe. He kissed her cheek the way you'd seal an envelope, quick, automatic, already thinking about the next thing. The door closed behind him before she could respond. Priya stood there for a moment, staring at the space where he'd been. Then she picked up her bag and left for work, tucking away the feeling that something was shifting beneath her feet. What she didn't know? Jordan hadn't lied about having meetings. He'd just left out the part about the 2 first-class tickets to Cancun tucked inside his briefcase. The resort with the infinity pool, the private villa, the woman who definitely wasn't his wife. Kayla Brandt wore expensive perfume and cheap patience. 26, sharp as cut glass, allergic to anything boring. She laughed too loud in nice restaurants and never apologized for taking up space. They'd met 8 months ago at some rooftop networking thing, the kind where everyone pretends to care about business cards while actually hunting for something more interesting. She'd been interesting. Now she sat across from Jordan at a corner cafe, swiping through resort photos on her phone like she was shopping for a new life. This one. She turned the screen toward him. Ocean view, white curtains, the kind of luxury that made promises it couldn't keep. Already booked. Her eyes went wide, delighted. You're serious. Private villa, direct flights, 6 days. He slid the boarding passes across the table. Kayla picked them up, grinning like she'd won something. And Priya thinks you're where? Conference in Houston. Does she ever check? She never does. Kayla leaned back, studying him with the particular intensity of someone who'd never been married and didn't understand the weight of that specific lie. You're terrible, you know that? He smiled, didn't disagree. What Jordan didn't see, what men like Jordan never see, is that the biggest risks aren't the ones you can measure. They're the ones you don't even know you're taking. Across the city, Priya was sitting in her supervisor's office, hands folded in her lap, expecting a scheduling update. We're moving you to international routes. Priya blinked. I'm sorry, what? Your performance reviews are exceptional. We want you leading first-class cabin service on long-haul flights. Her supervisor pushed a folder across the desk. First assignment is this Friday. Priya opened it slowly. Her eyes caught on one word, Cancun. She laughed, one of those sounds that comes out when your brain can't quite process what it's seeing. That's funny. Something wrong? No, it's just, my husband mentioned he might be traveling this weekend too, small world. Her supervisor smiled. Must be something in the air. Priya closed the folder. For half a second, she thought about calling Jordan, surprising him with the news. Then something stopped her. Some instinct she couldn't name. Quiet, but insistent. I'll tell him later. She had no idea how soon later would be. Friday morning came fast and golden. Jordan and Kayla moved through the airport like they'd been cut from a magazine. Him in dark jeans and a fitted jacket. Her in cream linen and sunglasses that cost more than most people's rent. They floated through security, champagne in the lounge, boarding passes in hand. I love airports, Kayla said, linking her arm through his. Yeah? Why's that? Because nobody knows who you are yet. Jordan smiled, but something about that sentence landed wrong in his chest. He ignored it. 20 minutes later, the gate agent called their flight. Flight 614 to Cancun, now boarding first class. Kayla stood immediately. Let's go. They walked down the jetway, footsteps muffled on commercial carpet, both of them already halfway to the beach in their minds. Jordan could practically taste the salt air. Then he stepped through the aircraft door, and his entire world stopped. She was standing right there. Priya. Uniform crisp, hair pinned back, posture perfect, smile warm and professional, and so devastatingly calm it felt like a punch to the throat. She was greeting passengers. She was working this flight. Jordan's foot stopped moving, just stopped. The man behind him bumped into his shoulder, muttered something, kept walking. Kayla's voice came low and sharp. Why'd you stop? He couldn't answer, couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Kayla followed his stare. Her grip tightened on his arm. Which one? The one at the door. Her breath caught. That's your wife? She doesn't fly international. His voice sounded like something breaking. She never has. Well, Kayla's voice went flat. She clearly does now. The line kept moving, 10 feet, 7, 5. Jordan told himself she wouldn't notice. Told himself she was busy, distracted, professional. Then Priya looked up. Their eyes met. 1 second. That's all it took. He watched recognition move across her face like weather. Fast, undeniable, complete. She saw him, saw Kayla's hand on his arm, saw the matching luggage, understood everything in the space between heartbeats. And then, this was the part that would haunt him. She smiled. Not a broken smile, not a devastated smile. A professional one. Welcome aboard, she said, voice steady as stone. Seats 3A and 3B, please enjoy your flight. Jordan walked past his own wife without saying a single word. First class is designed to make you feel untouchable. Leather seats that cost more than some cars, lighting soft as forgiveness, enough space between you and reality to forget who you really are. It didn't work. Jordan dropped into seat 3A like his legs had stopped taking orders from his brain. The armrest was cool under his hand. The cabin smelled like expensive air freshener and his own rising panic. Kayla buckled in beside him, moving slowly, carefully, like she was trying not to spook a wild animal. She recognized us, she whispered. Yeah. She didn't say anything. No. Kayla turned to face him fully. Jordan, that's not good. She's working. She won't make a scene. I'm not worried about a scene. Kayla's voice dropped even lower. I'm worried about what a woman like that does when she doesn't make one. Jordan had no answer for that. Through the gap in the curtain, he could see Priya greeting the last few passengers boarding. Same warm smile, same perfect posture. She looked like she was having the best day of her life. That terrified him more than anything. The aircraft doors sealed with a mechanical thunk that sounded way too final. The engines hummed to life. Jordan felt the slight lurch as they pushed back from the gate. No getting off now. 30 minutes into the flight, Priya appeared with the beverage cart. Jordan watched her work the cabin like an artist. She remembered names, asked about dietary restrictions, made an elderly woman laugh about something. She was extraordinary at this job. He'd always known that, but he'd never really seen it until now, when seeing it felt like swallowing glass. Kayla's hand found his knee. She's coming. I know. Don't be weird. I'm not going to be weird. But his heart was hammering like he'd committed murder, which in a way, maybe he had. Priya reached their row. She looked at Jordan first. Direct. Calm. The look of someone who'd already made every decision that mattered. Good evening. Can I start you with a beverage? Water. His voice came out strangled. She poured it without a word, set it on his tray. Then turned to Kayla. And for you? Kayla kept her voice bright, but Jordan could hear the strain underneath. Champagne, please. Of course. Priya poured. Set the glass down with a gentle clink. Then she leaned just slightly toward Jordan, close enough that only he could hear, far enough that anyone watching would see nothing wrong. I hope the conference in Houston goes well. Then she moved to the next row. Kayla stared at him. What did she just say? Jordan looked straight ahead. His blood had gone cold. She knows. Suspects? No. He shook his head slowly. She knows. Everything. The rest of the flight was its own special kind of hell. Dinner came in courses that Jordan couldn't taste. Movies played on screens he couldn't see. Kayla barely touched her food. Jordan didn't even try. Around them, other passengers laughed, slept, watched romantic comedies. Normal people doing normal things. Jordan felt like he was watching them through glass. She's not texting you, Kayla said quietly, staring at his phone. Not calling, not crying in the bathroom. Maybe she's just what? Professional? Kayla laughed, but there was no humor in it. Jordan, your wife just found out you're cheating on her at 37,000 feet, and she's acting like she's having the best shift of her life. That's not professionalism. That's a plan. You're overthinking this. Kayla looked at him like he'd just said the sky was green. Your wife is terrifying. He wanted to argue. Couldn't. Because the truth was starting to settle into his bones. While he'd been planning an escape, Priya had been quietly becoming someone he didn't know at all. Someone stronger. Someone who didn't need him to be okay. The wheels touched down in Cancun just as the sun was setting, painting everything gold and orange and dishonestly beautiful. We made it, Kayla said, exhaling hard. Jordan said nothing. They waited until the aisle cleared, then walked toward the exit. Of course Priya was standing at the door. Of course she was. Their eyes met one last time. He searched her face for anger, hurt, anything familiar. She gave him nothing. Thank you for flying with us. Enjoy your stay. Then she looked past him like he'd already stopped existing. The resort was everything the photos promised. Infinity pool bleeding into ocean, white curtains breathing with sea wind, sunset like a painting trying too hard. That first evening, Kayla stood on the balcony with wine, watching the water. This is perfect, she said. Jordan stood inside, staring at his phone. No texts, no calls, nothing. Kayla came back in, saw his face. You're doing it again. She hasn't reached out. And that bothers you more than if she had, doesn't it? Kayla sat on the bed. Silence from a woman like that isn't nothing, Jordan. It's strategy. He poured something from the minibar. She's probably embarrassed. She won't blow up her own life over this. Kayla looked at him for a long moment. She already made her choice. She made it on that plane while she was pouring us champagne and smiling. The week passed like a fever dream, beautiful on the surface, wrong underneath. They went through all the motions, dinners, swimming, photos they'd never post. Kayla laughed in the right places. Jordan smiled on cue, but Priya's silence followed him everywhere. Every morning, he checked his phone. Nothing. Every night. Nothing. This is the quietest disaster I've ever been part of, Kayla said on day 5. Jordan didn't argue. By the last night, something between them had curdled. They sat on the balcony, watching the ocean, and the space between them felt like miles. "I need to ask you something," Kayla said. "Okay." "If she's really done, if Priya actually walks away from this, what does that mean for us?" Jordan stared at the water. He had no answer. Kayla nodded slowly, like she'd expected exactly that. "That's what I thought." She went inside and started packing. They flew home separately. Kayla booked an earlier flight, hugged him at the terminal with the energy of someone closing a book they'd never open again. "Take care of yourself," she said. Jordan watched her disappear into the crowd. Then he boarded his own flight, alone, with 4 hours to rehearse a conversation he'd never get to have. The apartment building looked the same as always. Elevator slow, hallway quiet. He was already forming his speech, what he'd say, how she'd react, how they'd navigate this like adults. Then he saw it. An envelope, taped to the center of their door. His name in her handwriting. His hands shook as he pulled it off. Inside, divorce papers. Professionally prepared, already filed, just waiting for his signature. He read them standing in the hallway, and with every word he felt the ground drop away beneath him. When he finally pushed the door open, the apartment had been surgically edited. Her books, gone. Their photos, gone. Just pale rectangles on the wall where frames used to hang. Her reading chair by the window, gone. Half the closet empty. In the kitchen, her wedding ring sat on the counter. Next to it, a note. 4 words in her perfect handwriting. "You should have gone to Houston." Jordan sat on the kitchen floor. He wasn't sure when he'd decided to do that, but suddenly he was there, back against the cabinets, staring at nothing. He stayed there a long time. 3 months is enough time to understand what you've lost, not enough time to stop losing it. The apartment became a museum of his own bad decisions. Jordan went to work, came home, ordered takeout he didn't eat, and stared at walls that used to mean something. He threw himself into his consulting firm like a man trying to outrun his own shadow. Landed 2 major clients, made more money. It meant nothing. Kayla had gone quiet 2 weeks after they got back. A few texts that felt like obligation, then nothing. Whatever they'd shared in Cancun had evaporated somewhere over the Gulf of Mexico, and honestly, Jordan felt relieved. Being with her had started to feel like wearing someone else's clothes. Almost right, but wrong in ways that mattered. He'd sacrificed his marriage for a woman he didn't even miss. The math on that didn't work out in his favor. One Thursday evening, he sat in the back of a rideshare, stuck in Atlanta traffic, rain turning the windows into abstract art. The driver had the music low, something acoustic and sad that fit the moment too well. Jordan stared at nothing, which had become his primary skill. The car stopped at a red light. He glanced up at the digital billboard above the intersection and forgot how to breathe. Priya. Full size, professionally lit. Standing in an aircraft cabin in a redesigned international uniform, one hand resting on a seat back, looking directly into the camera with the kind of confidence that made you want to know her story. She looked the way she had that night on the plane, composed, certain, unreachable. The billboard read, "Sky First. Experience the difference." She was the face of the airline's new international campaign. The light changed. The car moved forward. Jordan kept staring until the billboard disappeared behind buildings, but the image stayed burned into his brain. "You know her?" The driver was watching him in the rearview mirror. Jordan didn't answer right away. He thought about the morning she'd stood in their kitchen, zipping her flight bag while he poured coffee without looking at her. Thought about how many times he'd walked past her like she was furniture. Thought about the note on the counter. "You should have gone to Houston." She'd known, probably for months. And instead of falling apart, she'd been building something. "Yeah," he finally said. His voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. "I used to." The driver nodded, went back to watching the road. The music played. The rain kept falling. Jordan pulled out his phone and did something he'd avoided for 3 months. He searched her name. The airline campaign was everywhere: magazine features, interviews about her journey from domestic to international routes, a podcast where she talked about finding yourself in the middle of your own life. She didn't mention him once, not even in the vague, wounded way people do when they're still angry. She'd edited him out completely, and she was thriving. There were photos of her in Paris, Rome, Tokyo, all the places she'd talked about visiting someday while he'd nodded without really listening. She'd stopped waiting for someday. She'd just gone. In one interview, the reporter asked about her personal life. "I was married once," Priya said. "I loved him the way you love someone when you're not quite finished becoming yourself yet. We both deserved better than what we were giving each other." Jordan read that line 7 times. We both deserved better. She'd given him an exit he didn't deserve, framed their ending as mutual when they both knew the truth. She could have destroyed him, told the real story, made him the villain in a narrative that would have followed him forever. Instead, she'd simply moved on. That was worse, somehow. Being forgotten hurt more than being hated. The car pulled up to his building. Jordan paid, climbed out into the rain, stood on the sidewalk longer than made sense. Above him, his apartment windows glowed with lights he didn't remember leaving on. Or maybe he had. Everything blurred together now. He thought about the flight, about boarding that plane with Kayla on his arm, feeling like he was getting away with something. About the exact moment he'd seen Priya standing at the aircraft door and how his whole world had tilted sideways. He'd thought he was so careful, so smart. He'd planned everything except the one variable that mattered: underestimating the woman who'd loved him. Priya had smiled at him that day, served him champagne, wished him well, and while he'd been sitting in that first-class seat feeling trapped, she'd been setting herself free. The really devastating part? She'd probably decided to leave him long before that flight. Maybe weeks, maybe months. The discovery at 37,000 feet wasn't the ending. It was just confirmation of a choice she'd already made. She'd been done with him while he was still planning his betrayal. Jordan looked up at the billboard one more time before going inside, but it was too far away now. Just lights in the distance, blurred by rain and bad decisions. He thought about texting her, apologizing, explaining, then realized how insulting that would be, like his words could somehow balance the scales of what he'd broken. Some things you don't get to fix. Some people you don't get to keep. He'd boarded that plane thinking he was flying towards something better. Didn't understand until now that the flight had been carrying Priya somewhere he'd never reach. Somewhere she was standing now, bright and free and whole, while he was still stuck in the departure lounge of his own making. The rain kept falling. Jordan went inside, climbed the stairs, unlocked the door to an apartment that had never felt emptier. And somewhere above the Atlantic, on a flight he'd never be on, Priya Mercer was serving champagne to passengers who didn't know her story. Smiling that same professional smile. Living the life she'd built from the wreckage of the one he'd destroyed. She'd gotten away. He never would. That was the thing about consequences. They didn't need to scream or make scenes. They just quietly rearranged your entire life while you were busy planning your escape. And sometimes, if you were really unlucky, they smiled at you from the aircraft door and said, "Welcome aboard." By the time you realized what you'd lost, you were already 37,000 feet from any chance of getting it back.